The wine glass hit the marble before Jonelle understood her own hand had let go of it. Her phone buzzed against the counter between the scattered pieces, screen lighting up cold and bright. 30,000 withdrawn. Memo line, repayment, raising you cost more than you think. She didn't move. Red wine spread slow across white stone, finding the grout lines, following them like something with a pulse of its own. Jonelle. Jaehoon's voice came from the doorway already sharpened, already reading wrongness in the room before he had a reason for it. He crossed the kitchen fast, glass crunching under his shoes, and lifted the phone from her fingers before she thought to stop him. He read it. Read it twice. Something behind his eyes went still in a way she'd only seen once before, the night a man who'd crossed his family stopped existing in every conversation that mattered afterward. A call since the wedding, she said, and hated how thin her voice sounded. Not my birthday, nothing, and now they take $30,000 and call it a debt. Isn't a debt. He set the phone down like it might detonate. It's a message. Who? That's what I intend to find out. She wouldn't let him make calls that night. Told him this was her family, her mess, hers to untangle in her own time, and he looked at her the way he always did when he disagreed, but respected her too much to argue it. A small tightening at the corner of his mouth and nothing else. She called her mother instead, barefoot on the cold tile, wine still drying dark on the floor because neither of them had bothered to clean it. Deanne Whitfield picked up on the fourth ring. A television murmured somewhere behind her, a game show, canned laughter rolling in and out like tide. You know why I'm calling? Then you already have your answer. Deanne's voice hadn't warmed since the gate. If anything, it had gone more brittle, stretched thin over something trying hard not to snap. You cost this family plenty raising you up right. Don't act surprised somebody finally asked for it back. Never asked you for a dime since the day you told me I wasn't your daughter. That's not what she stopped herself. A shuffle, like she'd stepped into another room, away from the television, away from someone. You don't know what you don't know. Then tell me. Silence stretched so long Jonelle thought the call had dropped. When Diane spoke again, her voice had fallen into something Jonelle hadn't heard since childhood, since her mother used to hum gospel low over dishes on Sunday mornings, before the wedding, before the gate, before no daughter of ours became the only sentence that mattered between them. Just leave it alone, baby. A breath, ragged at the edges. Please, for once, just leave it. The call ended before Jonelle could ask her to explain a word she hadn't heard since she was a girl. Baby. Jaehoon found her an hour later, still standing in the same spot, hands raw from scrubbing a stain that hadn't needed that much scrubbing. She called me baby, Jonelle said without looking up. He didn't ask what that meant. In his world, silence carried price tags too. He understood exactly what one soft word could cost a woman who'd spent so long being called nothing at all. He crossed to her, took her hands, turned them over like he could read the whole conversation written into her palms. I'm going to look into this, he said. Not a question. She didn't argue. Some nights she was learning. Love looked like letting someone else carry a weight for a while. The apartment had a way of remembering things Jonelle hadn't told it yet. She thought about that sometimes, standing in the kitchen the next morning while Jaehoon slept later than usual for once, the low winter sun cutting gold across the counters. 2 years of marriage had filled the space with small evidence of a life stitched together out of two very different ones. A jar of sea moss gel from her grandmother's recipe sitting beside a tin of loose-leaf barley tea. A stack of his mother's handwritten recipe cards, translated badly by Jonelle herself in a red pen, taped inside a cabinet door. A framed photo from their first trip to Busan, her laughing at something just out of frame, him watching her instead of the camera. They'd met at a gallery opening in Itaewon, back when she was still finding her footing in a city that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted her. She remembered the exact moment, a painting of a woman standing at a doorway, half in shadow, half in light, and a stranger beside her saying, in careful, deliberate English, that he thought the artist had gotten the shadow wrong. Too kind. Real shadow doesn't leave that much of you visible. She'd laughed before she could stop herself. He hadn't smiled, not really, but something in his eyes had shifted, like he'd been waiting a long time for someone to laugh at exactly that. It had taken him 3 weeks to ask her to dinner, and when he finally did, he'd chosen a tiny restaurant off a side street in Ixyandong that didn't have a sign out front. The kind of place you had to already know about. 12 tables, a grandmother in the back who cooked everything herself, kimchi jjigae so good Jonelle had gone quiet halfway through the bowl. You don't talk when you like something, Jae-hoon had observed, watching her. I talk plenty. When it's good. Only when it's not. Looked up at him then, really looked, and understood for the first time that this was a man who paid attention the way other people breathed, automatically, constantly, without ever needing to be asked to notice. 2 years later, standing in their kitchen with a wine stain still faintly visible in the grout no matter how hard she'd scrubbed, she thought about that dinner and wondered if noticing was also what was about to save them. He woke slow that morning, which almost never happened, and found her already dressed, already 2 cups of coffee in, sitting at the table with her laptop open to nothing in particular. You didn't sleep, he said, not a question, sliding into the chair across from her. Neither did you, if we're being honest. I felt you get up twice. I was working. I know. She reached across the table, laced her fingers through his without quite meaning to, an old habit from the earliest months of their marriage when touching him had felt like proof that any of it was real. Tell me the truth about something. Always. This dangerous, for me, not for the business, for me. He was quiet a moment, and she recognized the particular quality of his silence, not evasion, but care, a man choosing words the way he chose everything, deliberately. I don't know yet, he said finally. And I won't lie to you and tell you it isn't, just to make you feel better for an afternoon. What I can tell you is that I have never once in 2 years let anything reach you that I didn't already have 3 ways to stop. That's not the same as safe, he agreed. It's better. Safe is a promise nobody in my world gets to make honestly. What I'm offering you is more true than that. She studied him, the tired lines at the corners of his eyes, the stubble he hadn't shaved, the way his thumb moved slow and absent over her knuckles even mid-conversation, like touching her was simply a background function of being near her at all. Outside, Seoul moved in its usual restless rhythm, delivery scooters weaving between cars. An old woman roasting chestnuts on the corner below their building, steam curling into the cold morning air, the smell of it drifting faint through the glass. She watched a line of schoolchildren cross at the light, uniforms sharp, laughter carrying up 12 floors. The city still felt occasionally borrowed rather than lived in, beautiful and foreign in equal measure, hers only because she'd married her way inside it. But moments like this, his hand in hers, the steam off 2 coffees going cold, unhurried, those felt entirely her own. Whatever this is, he said quietly, it doesn't touch you, I won't let it. You can't promise me that, he admitted. But I can promise I'll be standing between you and it either way. She believed him. That more than anything he'd ever bought her was the thing she'd married him for. Her brother Marcus didn't answer for 3 days. When he finally picked up, his voice sounded worn thin, static, crackling behind him, somewhere loud, somewhere with too many voices layered on top of each other. Jonelle. Her name cost him something to say. You shouldn't be calling me. Somebody drained $30,000 out of my account, Marcus. Mama says it's a debt. I want to know what kind of debt needs my husband's forensic accountant to trace it in under 2 days. Silence on the line, and it had teeth in it. You need to let this go, he said, and there it was again. The exact phrase their mother had used, word for word, like someone had handed them both a script. Somebody's telling you what to say to me. Jonelle, who, Marcus? The call cut off, not a natural drop. The kind of silence that meant someone had physically taken the phone out of his hand. She stood in the hallway a long time after that, staring at the blank screen, something colder than betrayal settling low in her stomach. Betrayal she'd learned to live inside of already, ever since the wedding gate. This felt like fear. And fear, she was starting to understand, was contagious. Jae-hoon's men found Marcus 2 nights later, in an underground card room on the edge of a district that didn't exist on any tourist map. A warehouse gutted and rebuilt into something between a casino and a confession booth, where men lost fortunes and secrets in the same breath, and called it entertainment. Jonelle insisted on coming. This isn't your world, Jae-hoon said in the car, hand resting warm on her knee, thumb tracing slow circles like he could smooth the fear out of her through touch alone. He's my brother. Whatever this is, it started because of me. It started before you. His voice dropped, careful. I just don't know how far before yet. She looked over at him in the dim light of passing street lamps, the sharp, clean line of his jaw, the coiled stillness he carried into rooms like this one, and felt the old ache return. The one that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with how much she still wanted him, even now, even mid-crisis, even with her whole family unraveling in the back of her mind. Danger had always done something strange to the space between them. It sharpened everything. Made his hand on her knee feel like the only steady thing in the world. The card room smelled of cigarette smoke and spilled soju, an old ballad crackling faint from a corner speaker like it belonged to some gentler decade. Men in expensive suits sat hunched over cards with the particular stillness of people trying not to let their faces show how much they'd already lost. Marcus sat at the far table, tie loosened, a half-empty glass of whiskey sweating in front of him, sweat beading at his hairline despite the room's chill. He looked up when they entered, and something in his face collapsed, relief and terror arriving together, like a man who'd been drowning quietly and had just watched the shore vanish behind a bigger wave. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, standing too fast, knocking his chair back. "Sit down." Jae-hoon's voice carried no threat, only the total certainty of a man used to being obeyed in rooms exactly like this one. Marcus sat. Jonelle crouched beside her brother's chair, close enough to catch the whiskey on his breath and something sharper underneath it, fierce sweat, animal and unmistakable. "Talk to me." His hands shook around the glass. "I owe people money, a lot of it. Cards mostly, some other things I'm not proud of." He wouldn't look at her. "They came to the house. Told Daddy they'd hurt me if it wasn't settled. Daddy panicked. Mama panicked worse. Some man who came with them said there was an easier way, said you had money now, said family takes care of family, and if we called it a debt from raising you, you'd pay it and never ask questions." The floor seemed to tilt slightly under Jonelle. "You used our whole childhood as a cover story to pay off your gambling debt." "I didn't want to." His voice cracked down the middle. "I swear to God, Jonelle, I didn't want any of this. But the man who came to the house, he wasn't asking. He had men with him. He knew things about Daddy's business, about the house, about..." He caught himself, eyes flicking involuntarily toward Jae-hoon. Jae-hoon went very still. "About what, Marcus?" Marcus's throat worked before the words came. "About you, about her marriage to you. He knew things nobody outside this family should have known." Music kept playing in the corner, some tinny ballad about lost love, absurdly gentle against the sudden ice filling the room. "Names," Jae-hoon said. "Now." Marcus's eyes darted to the door like he expected someone to already be standing there. "I only caught one. Cho Min-yi." Jae-hoon's expression didn't change, but Jonelle felt his hand tighten almost imperceptibly against the small of her back, and something in that small pressure told her more than his face ever could. She didn't know the name. But she knew the look a man gets when a name means something he isn't ready to say out loud yet. "If you're just finding your way to us tonight, welcome, truly glad to have you here. And if you've been with us a while, welcome back, because you didn't have to come find this story and you did anyway. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight. It means more than you'd think to see how far these stories travel. If this one's already got its hooks in you, go ahead and like it, and subscribe if you haven't yet, because it's about to get a lot more dangerous for Jonelle before it gets any better." Cho Min-yi's office sat on the 4th floor of a shipping warehouse in Incheon that smelled permanently of salt water and diesel, a smell he'd long since stopped noticing. He kept the blinds half-closed even during the day, a habit from a different life, one where a man learned that visibility was a currency you spent carefully or not at all. He'd been watching the Whitfield situation unfold for 6 weeks now, and tonight, reviewing the report his man had delivered from the card room, he allowed himself something close to satisfaction. "They panicked exactly on schedule," he said to the young associate standing across from his desk, a man named Yoon who'd proven useful precisely because he asked few questions. "The brother folded the moment we mentioned Kwon's name. The mother folded before we even had to raise our voice. The wife," Cho considered this for a moment, turning a cheap ballpoint pen slowly between 2 fingers, an old habit that predated the money, predated the warehouse, predated everything he'd built out of nothing on the docks 30 years ago. "The wife is the interesting part. Kwon built his whole operation on loyalty. He trained himself. Every man around him vetted, watched, tested for years before he trusted them with anything real. But he married outside all of it. A woman from a family he never had time to properly investigate because he wanted her too badly to wait. He almost smiled. Love makes men sloppy in exactly the place they think they're strongest. You think the debt was enough to expose something. I think the debt was never meant to expose anything on its own." Cho set the pen down finally, folded his hands. "It was meant to see how her family would behave under pressure. Whether they'd protect her instinctively or fold the moment someone offered them an easy way out, they folded, which tells me Kwon's wife has no real defenses on that side of her life at all. That's not a weapon yet, that's just a door somebody forgot to lock. Yoon shifted, uneasy in a way he tried to hide. Kwon's people found out about the brothers' debt fast, faster than we expected. He's careful. I never said he wasn't careful. Cho stood, moved to the window, cracked the blind open enough to look down at the dock lights scattering gold across black water. But careful men have blind spots exactly where they love the hardest. I don't need to break Kwon Jae-hoon directly. I only need to walk through the door his wife's family left open and let him spend himself protecting her instead of watching his own borders. He let the blind fall shut again. Every empire falls the same way in the end, not from the front. From somewhere the man in charge never thought to guard, because he loved it too much to imagine it as a weakness. He didn't yet know that his own patience had already cost him the element of surprise, that Jonelle had walked into a card room 3 nights earlier and dragged the truth out of her brother before Cho's second move could even begin. Some men, Cho would learn far too late, built empires out of caution. Others built them out of a willingness to walk directly into danger for the people they loved. And that willingness, when it belonged to someone like Jonelle Whitfield, was a far more dangerous weapon than anything Cho had accounted for. Jae-hoon worked in his study that night with the lights low. 3 folders spread across the desk like 3 different threads of the same unraveling rope. Jonelle stood in the doorway a long while, just watching him, the particular stillness that came over his whole body when he was building toward a decision that would cost someone everything. There was something almost beautiful in it, she thought, the way danger settled him instead of shaking him loose. "Talk to me," she said finally, echoing the words she'd said to her brother, except this time meaning them for herself. He looked up. And something in his eyes when they found her softened the room's whole temperature, not the coldness of Cho's name gone, but something warmer laid gently over it, reserved for her alone. "Has been trying to find a way into my organization for over a year," he said. "Every direct route failed. My people are loyal, my family is careful." He tapped the closest folder. "But your family isn't mine. Not by blood, not by training. They were vulnerable in a way nothing on my side ever is." Marcus's debt gave Cho the opening he'd been hunting for. So this was never about the $30,000. The $30,000 was never the point. It was proof of concept, a way to test whether he could reach into my life through you without me noticing until it was already too late. He closed the folder slow. He was testing whether your family would fold under pressure. They did. Something in Jonelle's chest cracked, quiet and total, ice giving way beneath weight it was never built to hold. So my family didn't just abandon me at that wedding. They handed a man like that a door straight into my life. Knowingly. Jae-hoon's voice carried no real comfort in it, only honesty, which she'd learned to prefer. "Your mother didn't understand what she was becoming part of. I bet everything I have that she still doesn't fully understand it." Jonelle thought of her mother's voice on the phone. "Just leave it alone, baby. Please, not cruelty. Fear." And somewhere underneath the fear, she realized now, something that had never actually stopped looking like love. She couldn't sleep. Around 3 in the morning, she found herself back in the kitchen, standing near the exact spot where the wine glass had shattered days earlier, holding a mug of tea she hadn't touched, watching steam curl up and disappear. Jae-hoon found her there. He didn't say anything at first, just came and stood behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin against the crown of her head the way he did when words weren't going to fix whatever was breaking inside her. She let herself lean back into him, into the solid warmth of his chest, into the low, steady rhythm of his breathing that had become, over these 2 years together, the only thing that could slow her own heart down. "Keep thinking about the wedding," she said finally. "My mother at that gate, telling me I wasn't her daughter anymore. All this time I spent believing that was about you, about your world, about everything she didn't understand and didn't want to. Now I don't know what to believe." Her voice caught, and his arms tightened around her, an answer without words. "What if she wasn't disowning me because of who you are? What if she was trying to get me as far from this world as she could, because some part of her already knew it was dangerous, and she didn't have the language for that at a wedding, in front of everyone, with 24-year-old me convinced I already knew everything about love?" Jae-hoon turned her gently to face him, tilted her chin up with 2 fingers, his thumb catching a tear before it could fall. In the low kitchen light, his eyes looked almost black, and for a moment neither of them spoke, just the two of them standing close enough that she could feel his heartbeat through his shirt, steady where hers wasn't. "There's only one way to know," he murmured, and the words landed against her mouth like something he almost kissed instead of said. "She won't talk to me. You heard her on the phone." "She'll talk to you," he said, "if she believes you're already in danger either way. Fear without a shape keeps people silent. Fear that's already arrived tends to make people finally say what they should have said years ago." He kissed her then, slow, unhurried, the kind of kiss that had nothing to do with wanting and everything to do with need. Two people reminding each other what was still standing amid everything threatening to fall. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, and for one suspended moment the danger circling them both went quiet. "Whatever we find," he whispered, "we find it together." Robert Whitfield was in the garage when they arrived, elbow deep in an engine that didn't need fixing nearly as badly as he needed something to fix. He heard the car pull up, heard two doors close, and by the time he wiped his hands on a shop rag and stepped out into the driveway, his face had already arranged itself into the particular hardness Jonelle remembered from every difficult conversation of her childhood. Jaw set, eyes narrowed, a man building a wall before anyone had even knocked. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, not quite looking at her, not quite looking at Jaehoon either. "I think you did," Jonelle said. "I think you've been expecting this since the man in the nice suit showed up at your door 6 weeks ago." Something flickered across Robert's face, not surprise, but the particular flinch of a man caught in something he'd hoped would stay buried. "Your mother talked to you. Told me enough. I want to hear the rest from you." He looked past her then, finally, to where Jaehoon stood a few feet back, deliberately giving them space, hands loose at his sides in a posture Jonelle recognized as careful restraint. Robert's jaw tightened further. "I don't owe him an explanation." "You don't owe him one," Jonelle agreed. "You owe me one. I'm the one whose account got drained. I'm the one who found out my own family used my childhood as a cover story for Marcus's gambling debt." Robert set the shop rag down on the hood of the car, slow, buying himself time the way he always had, ever since she was young enough to watch him do it at the dinner table, whenever a conversation got somewhere he didn't want it to go. "That man came to this house and told me things about your husband's business that made my blood run cold," he said finally, voice rougher than she remembered it. "Told me he knew where you lived, knew things about the men your husband keeps close, knew things a stranger has no business knowing about my daughter's life. I have spent 30 years building a name in this town that nobody could touch, and some man in a suit walked into my garage and made me feel like I couldn't protect a single person in my own family." His hands, still greasy from the engine, curled into loose fists at his sides. "So yes, I let your mother make that call to Marcus. I let this happen. Because I was scared, and scared men do ugly things and call them practical. You could have called me." "Said what?" His voice cracked, the first real crack Jonelle had heard in her father's voice in longer than she could remember. "Called my daughter I disowned at her own wedding and told her I was scared for her. After I stood there in front of God and everybody and said you weren't my daughter anymore." He looked at her now, really looked, and something old and buried moved behind his eyes. "I have regretted that sentence every single day since I said it, Jonelle. I just didn't know how a man walks that back without looking like he was wrong the whole time. Pride is a hell of a thing to choke on." Garage went quiet except for the tick of the cooling engine, and somewhere down the street, a dog barking at nothing. "You were wrong," Jonelle said softly. "Not about being scared, about the way you handled it. You could have just told me the truth." "I know that now." Robert's eyes were wet, and he looked away fast, ashamed of it in the old-fashioned way men of his generation were ashamed of most feeling at all. "I don't know if I know how to fix 2 years of a wrong sentence, baby girl. I don't know if there's a version of me that gets to just say sorry and have that be enough." "It's not enough," Jonelle said. "But it's a start you haven't tried yet." Jaehoon stepped forward then for the first time, and Robert's whole body tensed instinctively, an old animal wariness surfacing despite himself. "Mr. Whitfield," Jaehoon said, voice even, careful. "I'm not here to threaten you or to collect on anything owed. I'm here because your daughter is my wife, and whatever comes for her family comes for mine too, whether either of us wanted that or not. The man who came to your garage will not be coming back. That threat is being handled, and it will not touch this house again." Robert studied him a long moment, really studied him, maybe for the first time in the 2 years since the wedding he hadn't attended, the 2 years he'd spent imagining a stranger instead of a man. "Why?" Robert said finally. Would you protect a family that disowned your wife at the altar? Because she loves you, Jae-hoon said simply, even after everything. And I have learned that the people she loves are worth protecting, whether they've earned it yet or not. Robert didn't say anything to that, but something in his shoulders loosened just slightly. The wall he'd built in the driveway losing one brick it hadn't meant to lose. Outside, Jae-hoon had already begun the calls that would end things properly. Voice low and precise in the car afterward, giving instructions to men Jonelle had never met, dismantling piece by piece the machinery Cho Min-yi had built to reach through her family and into his world. She sat beside him watching the neighborhood slide past the window, her childhood street looking smaller than she remembered it, the way places always do once you've lived somewhere bigger. 3 nights later, in a warehouse office that smelled of salt water and diesel, Cho Min-yi's phone rang with a call he'd been dreading without quite admitting it to himself. By morning, 2 of his shipping contracts had collapsed without explanation. By the following week, 3 men who'd once answered to him no longer did, quietly absorbed into arrangements Jae-hoon's organization had spent years cultivating for exactly this kind of moment. Cho never saw the countermove directly. That was the particular elegance of how Jae-hoon operated, dismantling a man's foundations so thoroughly and so quietly that by the time he understood what was happening, there was nothing left sturdy enough to stand on. The message, when it finally reached Cho through channels too indirect to trace back cleanly, was simple. The door he'd found into Kwon Jae-hoon's life had been closed, permanently, and any further attempt to open it again would cost him considerably more than $30,000 and a family's fractured pride. Cho Min-yi, sitting alone in his half-lit office with the blinds drawn, understood the message perfectly. He also understood, with the particular clarity that comes only after a defeat, that he had made the single mistake Kwon Jae-hoon's enemies always made eventually, mistaking the love in a careful man's life for a weakness, when it had, in the end, only ever been the thing that made him more dangerous. Marcus's debt vanished from whatever ledger it had existed on within the week, along with Jae-hoon assured Jonelle any leverage anyone could ever hold against him again, on the condition, made clear and absolutely final, that Marcus stayed far from anything that could put Jonelle at risk a second time. Marcus called her himself to say it, voice steadier than she'd heard it in months. "I'm getting help," he said. "Real help, not because anybody's forcing me to. Because I looked at what almost happened, and I don't want to be the reason it happens again." "I believe you," Jonelle said, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she meant it. Sunday dinners started again slowly, tentatively, the way things do when 2 people are both afraid of moving too fast toward something they've missed longer than either wants to admit. The first time Jonelle sat back down at her parents' kitchen table, Robert didn't say much, but he made her a plate himself, the way he used to when she was small, and set it down in front of her without a word, and that was its own kind of apology, the only kind he seemed to know how to give. Deanne called every Sunday evening now, sometimes just to talk about nothing, a recipe, the weather, a neighbor's new dog. Then, slowly more. She started telling Jonelle stories about her own childhood she'd never shared before. Stories about growing up scared and careful in a world that hadn't been built for people who looked like her to take up much space in it. Stories that helped Jonelle understand, finally, the particular shape of a mother's fear that had calcified, over years, into something that looked like rejection, but had never actually stopped being love wearing the wrong disguise. One Sunday evening, months later, Jonelle sat across from her mother again at that same kitchen table, 2 mugs of tea actually being drunk this time instead of held like shields. Diane reached into a drawer and slid something across the table without a word. It was a photo from the wedding, the one Jonelle had always assumed no one in her family had kept. Diane, standing just outside the frame of the official pictures, caught by accident in someone else's photo, watching her daughter walk down the aisle with an expression that had nothing to do with disownment and everything to do with a mother trying not to fall apart in public. "I kept it," Diane said quietly, "because some part of me always knew the truth, even when I couldn't say it out loud. I was never not proud of you, Jonelle. I was just more scared than I knew how to survive." Jonelle held the photo a long time, thumb tracing the edge of her mother's half-hidden face, feeling something in her chest finally settle after carrying a version of this story that had never been the whole truth. That night, back home. She found Jae-hoon on the balcony overlooking a city that had slowly stopped feeling borrowed and started feeling like hers. He turned when she stepped out, and something in his face, that careful, watchful tenderness he only ever showed her, made the last of the tension she'd been carrying for weeks finally let go. "Good visit?" he asked, pulling her into the curve of his body, her back against his chest, his chin settling against her hair the way it always did. "She kept a photo," Jonelle said. "From the wedding all this time." He didn't say anything, just held her tighter, his lips brushing slow against her temple, and for a long while they stood there together in the cold night air, watching the city lights scatter gold across the river below, two people who'd almost lost each other to a danger neither of them saw coming, standing closer now than they'd ever stood before. "I used to think love was the thing that got me disowned," she said softly. "Now I think it might be the only thing that ever actually brought us all back." Jae-hoon turned her slowly in his arms until she was facing him, his hand cradling her jaw, his eyes holding hers with a quiet, fierce certainty that needed no further translation. "Then let it," he murmured, and kissed her there in the cold, the city glittering wide and endless beneath them, the danger finally behind them, the whole rest of their life still ahead. Some love wears disguises so convincing even the people wearing them can't always recognize their own hearts underneath. Hers had worn anger for a while. Her mother's had worn silence. Her father's had worn pride so heavy it nearly crushed the both of them under it. And this steady, unshakable thing between her and the man holding her now, had never needed a disguise at all. It had simply waited, patient and certain, for both of them to stop running long enough to see it clearly. If this story found something in you tonight, we're grateful you spent this time with us. Whether you've been here for every story we've told or this is the very first one you found, welcome, truly, we mean that. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It's one of our favorite parts of doing this, seeing just how far these stories travel and who they find along the way. And if you'd like more nights like this one, go ahead and like the video, subscribe for what's coming next, and we'll see you again very soon.